Continuing on along in our Louisville football season preview series, we're going to talk about why the middle four games are going to determine the season's ceiling. With that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. As always, I want to thank you all again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Continuing on along into our Louisville football season preview series, we are on the second episode. We're going to talk about why the middle four games of the season against NC State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and Duke are going to determine the season. We'll talk about what I mean by that in the first segment. We will then go into a little bit of a brief overview of each of the four opponents in the second segment, and then the final segment we will give our predictions. So for those who didn't pay attention to the last episode, we are diving into a series, a three-part series, to where we talk about the Louisville football season in depth a little bit. We talked about the first four games in the first episode. We'll talk about the second four in this episode, and then the final segment or the final episode, we'll talk about the final four games of the season. So we're on the middle part of the schedule. Now, this is a schedule, according to many, it's one of the easier schedules in the Power Five. Would I go as far as saying that it's the easiest? Well, I'm not necessarily so sure, but according to a lot of analysts and publications, this is one of, according to or based upon the schedule last year or what these teams did last year, it's one of the weakest Power Five schedules in the country. And a lot of that can be attributed to the first four games, considering that you have Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, and Boston College. All four of those teams went under 500, and we talked about why it was critical that Louisville start out the season 4-0. Because when you get done with those four games, you have a very tough four-game stretch after that. Now, I understand that, we talk about it being an easy schedule, but make no mistake about it, these are still some tough. These are some tough places to play. These are some tough teams to face. You have to go down to Raleigh, which Louisville has sort of struggled with. You have to go to Pittsburgh, that is always pretty respectable. But all four of these teams that Louisville is set to play won at least 8 games in 2022. So all four of these teams coming off of a pretty solid season. Now, some have lost more than others. Some have been helped out from the transfer portal more than others. But nonetheless, they are all, I think, looking at the win totals for all four are at least projected to go to a bowl game. So you have to assume that these are going to be respectable opponents. I think that this 4-game slate for the Cardinals is truly going to determine the ceiling of the season. I think that Louisville's going to go 4-0 to start the year. I projected that. I predicted it. However, it's the next four that I think really are going to determine just how good this team is going to be this upcoming season. Because you could say, well, the four after that, you still have Miami and Kentucky. Virginia and Virginia Tech are supposed to be better in some capacity. I still think that at the end of the day, it's the middle four that I'm looking at and saying, if Louisville can get out of this portion of the schedule without losing more than 2 games, we're in for a really, really solid season. Because I have said time and time again that I personally think that this team is going to win anywhere from 8 to 10 games. I think 8 is the floor. 10 isn't necessarily the ceiling, perhaps, but I think that that's might be best case scenario, realistically speaking, right? So It's not naive to believe that Louisville can win all 4 of these games, but you should also understand that there is a chance that Louisville could lose all 4 of these games. Will they? Probably not. I'm not saying they will. I'm saying that you can't, if you're a Louisville fan, you can't sit here. And I understand that the schedule isn't as great as it has been in years past. I understand that to a T. What I will caution Louisville fans to believe is that just because on paper it looks easy does not mean that Louisville is automatically going to win 9 to 10 games. They're going to have to win these 50-50 games. They're going to have to go into some environments to where you might be a little bit uncomfortable, playing, because NC State's a tough place to play on a Friday night. We've seen Louisville lose countless night games in Raleigh. They've won a couple, but they've lost the majority of them. So I think that what we need to do with this schedule is you can look at it and say that, hey, look, Louisville did escape Clemson. They escaped Florida State. They escaped North Carolina and Wake Forest. They still have some respectable teams on this schedule that you just can't overlook. I mean, you can't overlook NC State. You definitely can't overlook Notre Dame, because that's probably a preseason top 10 team when the AP poll comes out here shortly. Pittsburgh, Duke, 2 teams that, will they be as good as they were last year? We'll see. Are they 2 teams that can definitely beat you if you're not on your A game? Oh, hell yeah. And it's not even a question, because they definitely can. But I think that this little portion of the schedule I look at and I think, okay, what's going to have the most impact on this team? In last year, it was that little stretch to where Louisville played Pittsburgh. They played Wake Forest, James Madison, and NC State. That 4-game slate is what I looked at and said, that's going to determine how good this team's going to be. That's going to really have a direct correlation on the win-loss total. And thankfully, Louisville won all 4 of those games. Unfortunately, they struggled in the early part of the schedule. They lost to Kentucky, to where they went, they went and probably didn't live up to what they could have been. But I think that the schedule this year is a little bit easier than it was last year. I mean, I think that, and I think you have a better team than you did last year. So overall, I look at this little section, this middle part of the schedule, and the bye week is included. It is in between the Pittsburgh and Duke matchup, which could come at a very solid and opportune time to get guys healthy, get them refreshed, allow them 2 weeks to prepare for a very, very solidly coached Duke team led by Mike Elko. But all 4 of these teams are looking to continue their success. They are replacing some players. There are some revolving doors via the quarterback level. Actually, 3 of these quarterbacks that Louisville's going to face in the first, or in these games, in these 4 games, all played. Or they're 3 quarterbacks that Louisville has played, but they haven't played them at this respective location. NC State has Brennan Armstrong, who was at Virginia. Notre Dame had Sam Hartman, who was at Wake Forest. Phil Jurkovec with Pittsburgh, who was at Boston College. All 3 of these quarterbacks have had some sort of success against Louisville. Some have had it multiple seasons, but all 3 of these guys are quarterbacks that Louisville has to respect. Not only that, you have Riley Leonard at Duke, who's coming back off of a fantastic season. So quarterback-wise, this is definitely going to be a huge test for the defense, because this pocket of the schedule is where you're going to face the best quarterbacks on the schedule. I think, Brennan Armstrong in this system, very solid quarterback. Sam Hartman has shown that when he's on, he is one of the best in the conference. Same with Phil Jurkovec, who has really hurt Louisville at times. And Riley Leonard's coming off of a fantastic season. So defensively speaking, you have a situation to where you're really going to be tested. And I'm glad that you have the opportunity to sort of work through the growing pains in the first 4 games when it's going to be allowed to do so, because you're going up against 4 teams that you should beat and that are, not projected to be great this season on paper, but defensively, you're going to really be tested in weeks 5 through 9. And then offensively speaking, I mean, NC State has one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. Pat Narduzzi at Pittsburgh is a great defensive mind. Notre Dame is going to be a top 10 team. And then you have Duke, who is led by a defensive-minded head coach, and Mike Elko. So you can also make the case that, hey, look, as tested as you're going to be defensively, Offensively, you're going to have to start clicking on all cylinders at this point too. Good thing is you have the game reps, you have that opportunity. However, to play the devil's advocate, a lot of these or inexperienced, unproven pieces on these other teams will also get that opportunity. So I do want to sort of talk about these four opponents a little bit in depth. Not too much. We're going to talk about all four of the opponents here momentarily after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. You post your job on LinkedIn. You add that hashtag or the purple hashtag hiring frame to your profile to spread the word. Simple tools like screening questions and other things helps you narrow the search and find the candidates with just the right skills and experience that you're looking for. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors, because at the end of the day, hiring the right team member can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. 4 teams that Louisville will be facing in this slate of the schedule: NC State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and Duke. All 4 won over 8 games in 2022. Now, granted, some lost more than others. Others added more from the transfer portal than some. We're going to start out with NC State. This is the #1 trip-up game on the schedule, in my opinion, because it's a Friday night game in Raleigh against NC State, where Louisville has only won once before at night in the ACC. And that was 2019. It was a very sloppy game, but Louisville ended up coming out on top. You look at this game, led by Dave Dorn. Sorry, I can't speak. And this is a trip-up game. I mean, just like playing at Virginia can be tough at times. I know that Louisville has won there a couple times, but they've struggled other times. Right now, it seems like many believe NC State to win around 7 games. That's sort of the win projected total, because you do lose Devin Leary to Kentucky, but you replace him with Brennan Armstrong in a system that he is now familiar with his former offensive coordinator. Brennan Armstrong, outside of last season, has been a guy that has pretty much every season caused Louisville some fits. And that's something that you have to focus on. Now, granted, you lose some of those playmakers at the wide receiver positions, like Thomas Thayer, or Thayer Thomas. I'm sorry, I completely butchered his name. I do apologize. But you have some guys like Jordan Houston back in the running back committee. He rushed for over 500 yards. There's a lot of moving pieces at the skill level positions. But with this new offensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator that really maximizes the scheme and allows unheralded guys to really succeed, I think that NC State's offense that struggled last season due to injury at the back half of the year could be in for an upgrade offensively. You look at defensively speaking, I mean, Dave Doran and the NC State defensive coordinator are 2 of the best defensive minds in the conference, maybe even the country. Peyton Wilson, their star linebacker, was probably going to go to the NFL draft. He decided to shock everyone. He's coming back. You have a very, very solid ACC cornerback duo. Aiden White is a all-ACC first-teamer. Shaheem Battle was solid last year. So the pass rush and the back half of that defense is really going to be good for NC State. That's something that you have to focus on here. That's why it's a trip-up game. I understand they're only projected to win 7 games, or that's the projected win-loss total. But I look at this. You're on the road at night, on a Friday night, in a hostile environment against an offensive scheme that hurt you at Virginia. It hurt you at Syracuse. You're obviously new coaching staff, but your defense is really going to be tested on September 29th down in Raleigh. So going to be a tough game to win down at NC State. Moving on along the cards, will then host Notre Dame in what is projected to be the biggest game on the schedule. Notre Dame probably going to be a top 10 team or just outside of the top 10 when the AP Top 25 poll releases here in the near future. The next year under Marcus Freeman. Big news out of the offseason for Notre Dame. Sam Hartman from Wake Forest transfers over to the Fighting Irish program. With their schedule, they had to play Clemson. They had to play some of the usual suspects. I've seen them projected anywhere from 8, 9, 10, up to 11 wins, possible fringe playoff level team. If everything goes right, they do have some solid pieces coming back offensively. Audric Estime rushed for just under 1,000 yards last year. They did lose Logan Diggs to LSU. Logan was a very, very solid part of that offense, receiving the ball as well as rushing. Notre Dame obviously always has a great offensive line. That's not going to change this year. It's going to be interesting what's going to happen without Michael Mayer, sealing off the edge. So we'll see how the tight end committee can do with no Michael Mayer now. So offensively, you're going to have a pretty solid team. Defensively, you lose your all-time leader in sacks, Isaiah Foskey, to the NFL draft, but you do have some position guys back at the linebacking core, the defensive backs room. It's going to be a veteran-led defensive backfield, back seven for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. It's a matter of what they're going to do in the pass rush, but they were able to address some of those needs via the portal. So Notre Dame is going to probably be the top team on the schedule, and I don't think that that's going to confuse anyone. However, one thing that you notice is that even when Louisville wasn't all that great, they still played Notre Dame pretty decently tough. I mean, 2019, 2020, realistic avenues to have won both of those games. If you were, I'm sorry, not 2020, 2021. They played Notre Dame up in South Bend. That was a game to where Louisville, had a chance, but they ended up losing both of those games. I do think that if everything goes to plan, I think that Louisville's going to be competitive in this one. Obviously, you host Notre Dame, which is great. We're going to see just how that fares for Louisville. What's going to be the record? Are they going to be 5-1? Are they going to be 5-0? Are they going to be 4-1? That's to be determined, but this is going to be the game that a lot of people circle and say that, hey, look, Notre Dame, October 7th, could be, if Louisville is good, could be a rocking L&N Cardinal Stadium. We'll see, but going to be a very, very good Notre Dame team that they are going up against. So moving on along, they will then travel to Acrisure Stadium up in Pittsburgh to take on the Panthers. Pat Narduzzi's team went 9-4 last season. Louisville beat them at Cardinal Stadium last year. Main thing is Phil Jurkovec going back to his hometown. He's playing for Narduzzi, reuniting with a former OC that he spent time with in 2020 and 2021 at Boston College. Obviously, no Izzy Abanikanda. That's the big news. One of the best running backs in the country. However, he had more than a capable backup behind him in Rodney Hammond Jr., who was the MVP of the Sun Bowl. He is back, going to be the feature back for Pat Narduzzi's team. They return their two starting wide receivers, their starting tight end. So there is some continuity on that offensive side of the ball. It's going to be a matter of how Phil Jurkovec is going to play. Keaton Slovis was kind of hit or miss last year, and that really hurt Pittsburgh outside of having the great rushing game. But Pittsburgh is one to watch for offensively. Defensively, they only returned 5 guys, but Pat Narduzzi, if there's one mind in the ACC that I think is going to mask over for some of that inexperience, it is Narduzzi. Bengali Kamara, who's going to be one of the better linebackers in the country, returns to that group. You have a solid trio of returning cornerbacks to focus on as well. But there is some inexperience. It helps the Panthers that they're playing the Cardinals actually after that midway point of the season. So Pittsburgh going to be a solid team. And then you conclude the 4-game stretch with Duke. Duke won 9 games last season. Mike Elko had a great season. Defensive-minded coach. They replaced their top 2 tacklers, but they bring back 4 starters up front on the defensive line. So you would assume that Duke's defense is going to be at least respectable. The Cardinals do get Duke at home coming off of a bye, or Louisville will be coming off of a bye, so that will help the Cardinals. 9 offensive starters, most notably led by quarterback Riley Leonard, who just seems to be scratching the surface of the type of player that he can be with their offensive coordinator, Coach Johns. Wes Johns, I believe, is his first name. But he will be a quarterback that Louisville's really going to have to, do their homework on, because he projects as one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC potentially this year. So 4 teams that all are probably going to have good offenses. Defensive pieces are moving around a little bit, but still solid defenses. So the main question, what's the prediction? Dalton, what are you saying that's going to happen? We're going to talk about that here momentarily. Before we do that, I want to thank you all again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. And then obviously we will be concluding this series on the next episode of the show. But heading into the final segment of the show, we're talking predictions. I predicted Louisville to go 4-0 in the first segment, or the first episode of this series. What about this? I think Louisville is going to go 2-2. I think that looking at that NC State game, it's a trip-up game. You've won your first 4 games. You go up against an offensive scheme that has given you trouble. I know that it's a different defensive scheme with different players, but Brennan Armstrong, great quarterback, solid defense as well on the road Friday night. I think this is the this is the game that I'm looking at, saying that I think that there's every opportunity to win this game if you're Louisville. However, I think that if you're making me pick the losses and where I think they're going to come, this is probably the one likely that I think. I think Louisville then turns around and loses to Notre Dame. I think that it's a close game, but Sam Hartman, with a solid offensive line, with solid skill players, with a good defense, it's going to be tough to win. I think that Notre Dame wins this game very closely. So Louisville goes 0-2 to start the stretch. I think that they answer with a bounce-back win against Pittsburgh. Phil Yurkovich, Rodney Hammond Jr., solid 1-2 punch for the Panthers. Solid defensive players, but I think that Louisville was able to get back into the win column with a win on the road against Pittsburgh to get them one win away closer to bowl eligibility. And I think that you then turn around and beat Duke. I think it's going to be a tough game. People will look at it and say, yeah, it's just Duke. This isn't the Duke team that you're used to playing. I understand the schedule wasn't the greatest for the Blue Devils last year, but they have a good quarterback. They have what's proven to be a solid coaching staff, and they've got the continuity on this team to be able to build off of last year. I think Duke's going to make things interesting, but I do think that Louisville comes out on top here because of I think that the firepower on offense is going to be tough for the Duke defense to take care of, and I think that it could potentially get into a shootout level. A shootout type of game, and I think that Louisville is going to really fare well in those types of games this season because I think that they're going to put a lot of points up on the board. So I think 2-2 is where I'm sitting at. Could you make the case that the loss could come to Pittsburgh or Duke and not NC State or Notre Dame? Sure, I think that the one loss I have set in stone is Notre Dame. And then I think Louisville loses to one of the other 3. Is it NC State? It could be. Is it Pittsburgh? I could see it. Could it be Duke? If Louisville doesn't handle business, I for sure think so. But is there an opportunity for Louisville to win all 4 of these games? Or what about lose all 4 of these games? For the latter, I mean, I think, like I said, I think you could lose all 4 of these games if you're not careful. I think that that's why this part of the schedule really poses a challenge, because if you don't take care of business to the level in which we know you can, that's where things start getting a little interesting because – I mean, all 4 of these are losable games. Let's not discredit any of these 4 teams. I'm not saying that Louisville is going to lose all 4 of these games. I'm saying that there's a chance. But to play the devil's advocate again, as much as there's a chance for them to lose all 4 of these games, there also is a universe to where they win all 4 of these games, because that would be under the assumption that the offense is as good as advertised and that you're able to put up those points. It also suggests that this defense is better than maybe some believe it to be. I think I'm a little bit in a wait-and-see approach for Louisville's defense. I mean, Jet Brohm didn't have the greatest defenses at Purdue, but you're recruiting differently here at Louisville. You have more opportunity. You don't have some of those academic hurdles that you have to fight. And you're recruiting better players. I mean, no disrespect, but rating-wise, you're recruiting better players. On paper, this is one of the most talented defenses that Louisville's had in quite some time. So I think that if Louisville's defense is able to at least match some of that expectation and get to a level to where they're top half of the ACC level defense, to where they're not allowing a bunch of big time plays, hey, there's an opportunity to win all 4 of these games. I think I'm going to meet in the middle here. I'm going to meet, sort of on the median, because I don't want to be too optimistic, but I don't want to be pessimistic. I think that Louisville is going to be in all 4 of these games, but some of these are 50-50 games. To go 9-3, to win 9 games, you still have to lose 3 games. And I think that Louisville's going to lose the majority of their games in this 4-game schedule. So that's something that I am looking at here. But ultimately, this slate, this middle 4-game stretch between NC State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and Duke is really going to determine the season. And I'm excited to see how Louisville reacts. So that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. To find the podcast on all streaming services, be sure to stay tuned to this graphic. And we will see you right back here very soon.